So I try to take that approach to the way I teach. But that was kind of the moment where I started to figure it out. I quit my job at the bar. I got a hold of Kathy, and I was like, hey, is there anything I could do around here, like work study? I became her assistant, which was real cool. I built all the still lifes. I did the artist quizzes, which I actually continue to do in my teaching now, although I make them study 100 by memory every semester. So if you have to do, I don't know how many there were, 50 or something, Kathy?
There's 100.
Yeah, okay, yeah, she does 100 too. So yeah, I may have productively lifted that.
No, that's
yeah.
good. That's good.
Yeah. So, but yeah, no.
It makes it easier to grade for sure.
Yeah. Well, it's like, and it's like, I describe it as like a hot 100. Like I update it every year, or every semester. There's usually 4 or 5 new people every semester. Yeah, I know, right? Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. But no, I went to Henderson, and I knew I wanted to teach before I knew anything of what I was good at. And at some point I thought, well, being a cop's not that bad. So that's where the criminal justice came in. But yeah, no, I had to figure out what I was good at to teach in the first place. So I went to Henderson for the BFA, intending to go get the MFA, because you have to get the MFA to teach. I will say this: if you don't know you need it to teach, think about grad school, because it's the only reason why you have to get an MFA is to teach college. Is it productive? Yes. Is it helpful? Yes. But is it absolutely critical? Not necessarily, unless you want to teach college. I realize I'm saying that while we're also trying to recruit grad students. So forget that part when I get to that later, when I shamelessly plug our department. But yeah, no. Yeah, so I went there for 3 years, and like Kathy said, I was fortunate enough to go straight into grad school afterwards. Went to grad school at UTSA, thankfully on a scholarship, and she was real helpful and helped me do that. Yeah, it feels like yesterday, Kathy. That's wild. But yeah, went to UTSA for grad school. I only applied for 5 programs. And got accepted and got an award package to this one. Completed my MFA. I started to teach as a graduate student, which is part of the reason why I chose UTSA. Again, I knew I wanted to teach. I started teaching my 2nd or 3rd semester, I believe 3rd. So by the time I graduated, I had 2 years of teaching experience, and then they hired me straight out from grad school, where I'm speaking to you live from what is now my office. So that's kind of the fastest summary I can think of.
It's a much bigger office than mine. And again,
it's very large, because part of my role here is I'm the gallery coordinator for our main campus gallery in addition to teaching. So like there's like a bunch of pallet jacks and stuff and pedestals and whatever. But that's the shortest version of that story. Of course, I teach here now. I have an approach to teaching which I sort of describe as conversational. It's just totally something I made up. But basically the way I mean it is, when we're in a classroom, it's, there was this dynamic, and again, it goes back to that Kathy. It was a real offhanded, brief meeting context of like, we don't need another mediocre painter. But it's not a situation where I lecture and I talk and everyone just shushes and then writes what I say down and then we take the quiz later. It's sort of a dialogue where, if you guys have any questions, you all have brains with thoughts that are valuable, share them. Like I do this, we do my teaching by Zoom. So you can always do the tippy tap, chitty chat if you need, if you guys have questions or whatever. Otherwise, I'll just sort of do my spiel, I suppose. But yeah, and then I've been teaching since 2016, and I got graduated in 2018, and I started full-time. And right now I teach, so of the classes I've taught at UTSA, they are new media, which is sort of what they call everything computer-based and performance-based. I've taught the 1000s to the 4000s of that. And then all of 2D foundations and painting and drawing. So I typically tend to teach the 2D disciplines. If you've seen the work in the Russell Fine Arts Gallery, you'll be familiar with sort of what I mean by that. But I paint a lot of anime eyes and explosions, and it's very crass, and it usually involves music. That's sort of the casual elevator speech of what I have of sort of what I make. Yeah. Do you guys, do you have any questions? I assume your name is Regina.
All those people, you can just go for it. There's Chelsea. Hi, everybody. There's Caston. Caston Searles is here.
Hey.
Yeah, any questions? It says, what is your favorite part about teaching?
Again, like I knew when I was a kid, I wanted to teach before I knew what I was good at enough. I just had to find it. If I was good at math, I was going to be a math teacher. I find teaching to be the part that makes learning art functional. Learning art and making art is very introspective, and it's very self-gratifying. Not to diminish it. I think making something for yourself is important. And I think making something you enjoy and spending that time and maybe deferring, having kids or deferring other things in your life to be creative, it's not like if you do it for yourself, it's a problem, but it doesn't really functionally help others directly. It can help others indirectly. I think there are moments when I've seen artworks in Chicago when we did trips that literally, like I remember them like it was yesterday. They kind of changed my life. But teaching is that fulcrum that allows the understanding of how we understand the visual world to positively affect people's lives. I didn't want to be this dude who just painted in a dark room and was like, this is what I made. That feels a bit selfish. And the point of life is functionally to help others. You just find the way you can help best.
Aww.
I know. That's really what it like, because if you're not here helping people, you're just kind of like a bump on a log floating down the river.
Yeah, exactly. There's more questions. So just, this is a great question, y'all. Regina, why did you go from law to art?
When I was a terrible student in high school. Terrible, worst, awful. You'll learn that most of your teachers were not particularly great students, and that's usually part of the reason we got into teaching. I sort of learned the hard way how teaching is ineffective. When I was in high school, I went to Lakeside. I don't know if any of you went to school in Hot Springs, but I went to Lakeside, which is a rather nice school. And I was a part of the Island of Misfit Toys in a trailer park at the furthest possible end from that district. Like if you were to look at the district map, you could go to the furthest possible corner and you'd find a trailer, and that's where I was in. And they didn't prioritize anything creative, to be perfectly honest. When the counselor would talk to you, it'd be like, the students I went to school with were students were the kids of people who own car dealerships or doctors or lawyers or something like that. I never felt like they really grounded the creative arts into a functional, practical thing to do with your life. I know Rams, they're still the Rams. It's not a problematic thing, so I assume it'll be that for a long time, but and I had to kind of find a path that was appropriate through the counseling center because, they would ask me what I'm interested in. It was always law, politics, and art. And I was not a polite young man, so politics wasn't going to happen. I was frequently in the principal's office, so I don't think anyone was going to say, that's a senator waiting to happen. I went
Great art teacher, see? We all have a place.
Yeah, so I went with my interest that I felt was best functional. I went through a brief period in high school where I was put in juvie. So that was a moment where I became I know, right? I became familiar.
You never told me that. That's a great story.
It's a very long story. And unfortunately, it was for something I actually did not do, but it doesn't really matter when you're behind the bars and they're just doing their job. So I kind of learned the hard way when the law cannot work well and for whom it does not work well. And for me to be a kind of poor child of a family where no one, my dad didn't graduate high school. My mom never went to college. I'm the first one in, basically you can go back forever, who went to college. It's me and my cousin Amy. That's it. They don't go up. So I saw firsthand where it went wrong, similarly to how in teaching where I saw where it went wrong. And that was where I tried to go first. And then I realized as a 20-year-old, I had to take a survey art history for my criminal justice degree. Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, art historian.
Dr. Malone.
I had to take a survey art, and I was I was still learning to be a good student. So I got there on the first day dead last to a class of 250, right when he started. So I had to sit right up front to this huge stadium. And it was an angry graduate student who just graduated, who taught this class, but he went to school for the photography MFA. So you could tell he like loved it, but he was talking to kids who didn't want to be there because we were all non-majors. And he would just be like, he'd be like, Manet, Picasso, Van Gogh. And I sat up front in this, you know, because it's a 250 stadium course at the University of Arkansas. So it's a projection the size of a wall. And I, in real time, was there like at the front seat of a movie theater. And it was this bizarre experience where I saw art described as a real discipline that people care about, that people went to school for their whole lives about. That art was something that has happened as long as life has happened. When I teach painting, I start with the history of painting, which is basically that you can go to any part of the world at any time in any place, and people made creative things. You know, we start with the caves where they sort of put their hands on, that exist in sort of Indonesia and exist in Australia and exist in France. And you can find them everywhere, and they happen at the same time. So it was then that I realized, you know, I'm 20, I could try this, and if it doesn't work out, I'm a 25-year-old in college, and who cares? So I kind of rolled the dice, and it thankfully worked. Yeah, no, it was, shout out to Dr. Malone. It was for an art historian or an art history class. So I tend to run long. I'll try to keep them briefer.
Oh, go for it. Go for it. We're here. Everybody's in quarantine.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah. I mean, we're all laying around. I'd rather hear you. Okay, so another question, I'll give you some more. What was your, and this could, actually, here's what I'm going to say. I'm going to go this way, because I think if we go to your artistic focus in grad school, we can then go and look at some of the new work, because I want to hear what you have to say about that too. But Chelsea asked, Chelsea Collins, who's great. She's a wonderful, she came from community college and transferred, but and she's a BSc art ed person. Did you know you wanted to teach college, or was K through 12 ever a possibility?
I did the practical thing, which was if you teach college, you're then qualified to teach K through 12. So if I tried college and it was just a nightmare, I could use that MFA to negotiate a higher salary, because you have the terminal degree and it may be a couple grand more, but it's going to be more. Yeah, I consider K through 12 to be an option. I've applied and been interviewed for K through 12s. Specifically, I usually apply to ones that are, what do they call them? Charter schools. So like the most recent one was the New Mexico School for the Arts, which was like the school in New Mexico if you wanted to be a dance or painting, whatever kid. So yeah, and that was real cool. It was very strange because this was like right snap before the pandemic, but yes, so I don't consider them to be different. I find them both to be two sides of a coin. And the way I kind of describe it is, having taught college, I know where K through 12 students need to go. And, you know, if I were to apply for K through 12, it would be, I know where they're going. So.
Right.
Yeah.
One thing I want to say before we go any further, I've made you a co-host because my internet's been a little funny today. And if it goes down, I'll go to a hotspot on my phone and get right back in. But just everybody be cool. Here's, and Jade says Rams, like go Rams for Lakeside. And then Sam asked, and Sam's studio art major, and she's asking, what was your artistic focus in grad school? And maybe what you can talk about here is what happens to you when you leave undergrad and then are crushed to a pulp and then bloom as a flower.
Yeah. I started as an art student at Henderson at 22, having never drawn, having never painted, having never really done any of that. I just had the sheer force of will and the stubbornness that I inherited from my parents to kind of will myself through it. And to be honest, I had no idea what I was doing in undergrad. Now, I understand now, no idea. I had an idea, but I did not have an idea. It's kind of like, the way I describe it is like, you find your author's voice or your sort of like artistic voice. It's like being shot into the woods and you find your way out of the woods. every single person will find a different way out, but the way you get out follows a certain set of guidelines. You don't just obviously walk in a circle, right? So in undergrad, I tended to make things that were very figurative and things that were very landscape based. When I graduated, I did these like panoramic landscapes where I would go to a Google Maps and I would go to a Google Street View and zoom out all the way to where there was really, really severe curvature on the images, and then stitch those images together in Photoshop essentially, and then paint those as sort of like 12-foot wide versions. Some juror was very kind to make my painting of Taiwan win the best of show in my last year, which I appreciate.
Awesome.
Because I tried every year and I didn't get in, but I got in the last year. So I started basically grad school with an idea of landscape. And when I wrote my letter of intent or cover letter about like, what do I make? It was, I'm interested in a landscape and how we relate to a landscape now that we exist so digitally. You know, we're very aware of it now, but essentially you can see every part of the world simultaneously and you're never seeing that part of the world. It's kind of this like oxymoron of what I understand now to be the panopticon, which is basically like a single position in space where you can see everything simultaneously. And when you see everything simultaneously, you're seeing a perspective that is unique and affords to it a set of like power, as Foucault would talk about. We're not so, but yeah. So it was about landscapes. My first year, I made a rule for myself, which was I'm not going to use color and I'm not going to paint, because I didn't go to grad school to just do the same thing. Because there's this little thing they don't tell you about grad school. I put all my ducks in a row and got my folder together and threw it at the schools, and it stuck with one. And I got in, and the first day I get there, they go, this is where you are in a studio. And they go, we'll see you at midterm. Grad school is basically a giant empty space where they hopefully throw money at you and they tell you to make stuff. No one told me what to do. No one told me how to do it. No one told me when to start doing it. And that has a learning curve, which usually bucks quite a few students. Then people show up occasionally when you make things, and then they critique the death out of it. And you feel very confused. I took a lot of pride in the work that I made, and you realize when you've been working on it for like 3 years of grad or undergrad, you get to people who have never seen it before, and they see it more directly and sincerely. So I started with the emphasis in landscape. I went from street views of Google Maps to aerial views from like GPS satellites. And the first body of work I made was detainment facilities from the War on Terror from 2001 to 2009. I basically drew those as giant landscapes from satellite views in charcoal, ranging from about 18 by 24 to 6 by 8 feet. And then I had a weird year in the middle because it was a 3-year program where I just worked only with color and no form, because you got to just experiment. And then my last year, I started to make the work that has become what it is now, where it's more focused around the idea of the spectacle and entertainment and how we relate to entertainment. Not in a sort of, I try to be very subjective about it without making a kind of narrative, a value assessment. I try not to end the work I make with saying so-and-so is good or thus is bad or therefore, but instead to kind of arrange elements of typically pop culture or just anything relevant to entertainment so that we can see a kind of version of ourselves that we all make together that we could never understand by looking at what one individual makes, which is basically where the work is now. Yeah, that's a real slapdash 3-year summary, but yeah, went from landscapes to pure color to sort of violent.
I didn't that much in 3 years, but that's pretty crazy. I'd love, like, please send me. I'd love to see any of that stuff. I'm excited about thinking about the charcoal. We're having advanced drawing. I'm stacked and Greenwoods. Don't tell NASAD, but I'm just kidding. But she's going to be teaching advanced drawing, advanced painting, and painting 2. So it'll make, and there'll be enough folks in there, but she's doing it on Friday for, I think it's 4 or 5 hours. whatever every week. And I'm excited that the kids are going to be able to start maybe doing some really big drawings. So that's wonderful. Tell us, I don't know if on your computer you may want to show some images, or tell us maybe about your work right now. And let's see. And guys, anybody that has any questions, like Houston just got married to a wonderful person. I saw her picture, but so he's had a big year this year.
Yeah, 2020 has been very wild for sure.
Hi, Houston screen.
Hello, people. I benefit from having a very specific name. There is one of me on the planet. So what we're currently looking at is the website that I have. And I have a couple of, like, we have all of the most recent work here, and we have sort of like the way that I build my work in doing kind of applications for those who maybe are interested in sort of like a professional path or school or something. And I have examples of video work, both that I make and my students make, because a predominant majority of what I teach is new media. I've been very fortunate that Mark McCoyne and Sarah Lasley here at UTSA value my input for new media. So I've taught a year of our 4,000 level. So I get to kind of
great, Houston.
The people about to graduate. So yeah, this is, if we were to see the body of work that's currently at Henderson, it would be these kinds of works. It will hopefully make a kind of context about like what I mean when I say it's like, the idea is like, it's a conglomeration of spectacle. It's this idea of like things that exist from typically kind of entertainment, but they capture attention and an imagination in a way that seems paradoxical. Like the easiest way I describe it is like, why do people like bad things? And why, like really, like when you see when there's a car accident on the highway, how many people are going to slow down and look? And why do they do that? Why do places like Twitter and Facebook have to build algorithms to remove violent content from their media platforms? You know, you would think people just wouldn't do that, but there's something fundamentally human that draws us to those things in the same way we are drawn to things that are otherwise.
You died.
Just like things that are otherwise very consumable, like cartoons and movies. So yeah, it usually takes those two things, and it takes a kind of sweet with a kind of sour to make something that's digestible. Because if you make it too sort of grotesque and upsetting, no one will engage with it. Usually it overlaps with karaoke a lot. I do a performance series where I literally sing a kind of version of karaoke, which is sort of the easiest way I could explain that. It's just think of karaoke, but put a bunch of violent videos. If I were to play a section of this with the mute, you guys can get like an idea of what's going on. This was a performance I did in Austin where if you were to see the show at the Russell Fine Arts Center, you would see a video that plays that has lyrics from Let's Dance, a David Bowie song. So I would project that video across the three walls in the space, and I would sort of wear a semi-professional outfit, and I would be your comical song and dance, where I would sing the song, and then I get people to sort of engage with this experience where
you did
they go from
karaoke?
viewer in the beginning. In the beginning, they are watching. Yes.
Oh my God.
I can play a section of the audio.
Do it.
To the songs playing on the radio. Wow, color lights up your face. Sway to the crowd to an empty space.
So I'm basically singing the whole song, and it starts off as very kind of mundane. I start with karaoke because it does the same kind of thing. When people watch karaoke, they watch it for two reasons. Someone is going to be magnificent, or someone is going to bomb fantastically. And either way, we will be entertained at their expense.
Yes, good. Yeah.
So I kind of do that, and then it starts with me at the front, them as viewers in the space, and I begin to kind of sing and then go into their space and kind of productively force them to become members of this. They start as just viewers, and when I dance with them and I get them to sing along with me because they're popular songs from the 80s, they go from being viewer to participant. I kind of invade their personal space bubble. And functionally why it becomes a performance is to do just that. It gets them to go from viewer to participant. And you can notice, like, people are smiling and taking boomerangs and putting things on Instagram. You know, there are images of explosions and people dying and people getting hurt happening all around them. But because they're song and dance, and I am sort of their you know, man on the, I'm sort of like their sacrifice to kind of be entertained by.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's, you know, there are certain things that a performance does about entertainment that no painting can do, and that's sort of what makes the decision about when it's a painting and when it's a performance. Yeah, and this was in Austin, so
Very
that's always
cool.
fun.
I'm blown away. This is really great. Hey, remember Caston Cyril's, right?
Yes.
Caston says, hi, Houston. Love the new work. Do you have contemporary artists that are influences to the work you're making now?
Yes. When I started grad school, I made it an endeavor to read everything humanly possible. Yes, I also began to vaguely undress during these performances. But
Wow.
I
Just kidding.
if you undo a couple of buttons while standing around people and you're dancing, it kind of crosses that threshold even more. Like really, it's, and then so.
That's great.
So when I was in grad school, one of the first persons that I found that I was really affected by was Trevor Paglin. And Trevor Paglin's first discipline is, just for reference, if we're vaguely aware of the content of the video, just imagine it's very graphic and it's very upsetting. Listen to the applause that people do when you do karaoke. Like, independent of, like, they just completely forget every bit of context for the video and they just go, that was amazing.
That's crazy. And
I've done a couple of them in Austin, and I've done a couple of them in San Antonio. And no matter how far I push it, people always clap. Because part of what I'm trying to find is, where do people stop consuming that entertainment? Where do they actually become objective of the entertainment?
Interesting.
But yeah, Trevor Paglin's one. I use a lot of humor in my work and puns. Joshua Citarella and oh my God, what's his name? The guy who works with Joshua Citarella.
How do you spell Joshua's last name?
Citarella. And his friend is Brad Trammell. They make very sort of postmodern work, which uses a lot of humor. And Joshua Citarella uses a lot of digital means to make it. Oh, hello, Jack. But yeah, so those are a couple. There aren't a whole lot of people that actually use images of like real, put air quotes on there, like harm or sort of disturbing content. There are a few, but like Trevor Paglin did a series about Guantanamo Bay, like that kind of. Yeah.
Hey, let us see your face while you're, or show us another picture.
So another version of that work, like if we wanted to see sort of like the contents, Don't Forget Me is a different video that does the similar kind of thing. So I have three images or three works of the series that do that kind of assimilation of content from like pop culture and like less consumable media. So this would be like the kind of video that plays in that space when I perform. This one includes images of O.J. Simpson because he's someone who has kind of crossed that threshold from sort of,
Good
I
call.
entertain you to, we understand something very disturbing about that individual. And it gets us to kind of confront the lyrics of a song in a way that operates very differently than when we, like, this is the song from The Breakfast Club, the Don't You.
Yeah.
So I typically will have, I would always sync the events. This is going to, yeah, I'll sync the events to sort of land with sections of the music, that kind of thing. And this is what I was making right at the end of my graduate school program. And it has all of the typical trappings of graduate school.
Where are you getting your imagery?
So that's usually the first question I get. I did this, when I first made this as an idea, I had my professor go like, Houston, where did you even find that stuff? Part of it comes from sort of like, so the consumable media is very easy to find, right? Everyone knows Looney Tunes. Everyone knows sort of like America's Funniest Home Videos. And part of the work in showing this kind of footage is about where that media is inhabited. I made this in 2016. So this was maybe before the idea of like post-truth or like bizarre parts of the internet where people come up with unflattering ideas that are problematic, was like at the forefront. This was right in that development of like when, 4chan memes actually had a consequence to our daily lives.
Right.
So, I would go to places like 4chan. I would go to places like, I would literally go to like the dark web. I would try to go to those places that kind of force that question of like, when you see this content, you go, where do you even find this? Because it forces the viewer to examine the channels they consume media. No one questions it when they see a movie clip, but when they see, an image from Brazil or, oh, that's an unpleasant one. Or like China, it forces this idea of where that media comes from and why it's shared and how I got it in the first place. So yeah, just the typical seedy places you probably hear on the news. Yeah. So that's some of the more video work.
Hey, and now here's a question that relates to that. How do fair use laws play a part?
I typically don't worry about that because it is so conglomerated.
Exactly.
There's a way of thinking about it, which is typically like, there's like this, what I describe as like the Stephen Colbert way, which is satire gives you a kind of legal coverage. If you're obviously understood as a satire, that gives you a legal coverage. But, if we were to literally list out as credits where all of this video came from, it would be about 9 feet long. And it comes from places that don't necessarily require attribution. Like I had an interesting way to put it is, do you have to give ISIS a credit line when you take one of their videos? It's like that. It's like these things are typically made by defense companies, which are sort of public use. This specific clip is from an ISIS execution. They're not people that are going to copyright strike your material. So yeah, and if it's made, I always describe it like a meatloaf. If it's made with like 1,000 parts, no one part is great enough that it demands authorship.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
Also, I think there's something about the reality TV phenomenon, which I'm way, or true crime and all of those kind of things that have the same connection to this, yeah.
Yeah, and it makes for something that's kind of like lightly funny and then upsetting, and then like I had at my thesis show where we had I had the video broadcast at 40 feet by about 20 feet. It was like a billboard-sized video in the back room. We can actually see that sort of here.
Good, yay! Why didn't I come to that? I should have come down for that.
So there was like all of this back wall was a sort of two projection stitched thing. And like this guy comes in with his 4 kids and his wife and kids are over here playing on the green screen. And when you play in the green screen, it embeds you into the video. And the dad's just sort of standing in back all confused and going like, is this about like how far we've come as a culture? And I'm like, yeah, I guess in a way. Again, I try not to put it in a perspective that gives us a sense of definitional like thesis to draw from. It's like we leave this and we go X is good or X is bad. Because I think fundamentally there are parts of each. This is a remote controlled system where if you press buttons, it makes GIFs pop up, where it makes the videos change.
Stop it. This is amazing.
It has an interactive component. And there's something about interaction in media that is undeniably just like, we just want to consume it forever. So, we get Al Roker winking. All of a sudden, they don't really care if that's an ISIS member, making propaganda on the left. So,
right.
Yes. Yeah.
Stop it. This is great. I'm so happy. Good Lord.
Yeah.
I'm so glad we're recording this too.
There's I'm about to demonstrate that if you were to stand in the green screen, it will kind of embed you within the video. And there were people who that night started to take sort of selfies. Like they would stand in the green screen and it would embed them into the background. And, they would stand up there and then their friend would go take a photo and they're literally standing under an ISIS flag, or they're standing next to sort of angry Henry Rollins, whom, if you don't understand the context, will probably just look like a sort of white supremacist guy because he's bald and yelling. And
I saw him in concert.
Yeah. This is sort of like my monolith where it houses all the computer components and the speakers. Because if we were to listen, I took the song from that movie where the kid, Ferris Bueller's Day Off. I took the song from Ferris Bueller's Day Off, the Day Bow Bow, and I put it through a Japanese MIDI program and just crunched it to death. And it would play on 2 monitors at full volume the entire exhibition on a loop forever. So if you were to walk in, it would just be like, it sounded like a club from the outside. So it's a dun 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 dun.
Wow.
So that's what is kind of partly hidden in that. And that was my thesis show.
Right. Yay. Houston, amazing. Truly.
A real trip.
Yeah.
Have
you thought about showing that again?
Yes, I've applied for exhibitions with that. My work has shown in other venues since graduating, but there's something about a video of ISIS members that usually doesn't float to the top for like a sort of a gallery knitting circle kind of thing.
We don't care.
Yeah. No, you guys have a bit of it, yes, but no, I still possess all the material.
Oh, I know, this is fabulous. Okay, Anne asks, I'm loving the care you take with tone between the disturbing and the lighter elements. Can you talk about how this voice developed for you?
That's a really good question. Way to go, Anne. So there's something like when I'm talking with my students, it's like the kind of way I describe it is if you try to make artwork, figuring out, like if you try to know what you do before you make it, you usually won't make anything. Part of how you figure out what you make is just by making a lot and a lot and a lot. And then you kind of like lay it all out and you look at it and you see what's thematically relevant. Every single student can be given the same exact prompt and they will make a different work. That's sort of what's unique to the creative arts and what gives it sort of a value unique to creativity. If every writer wrote the same book, there wouldn't need to be writers and we wouldn't need to read. If every painter made the same thing, it wouldn't need to do that. I have had an interest in these topics since I was a kid. So when I go to make something, it just kind of feels natural to put, Black Flag and a dancing dog with Al Roker and ISIS fighters. It just makes sense. And when it's a kind of bizarre thing to explain, but it's just sort of the way my head organizes those things Tetris style. And I've never had an interest in a declarative way of understanding things as being good or bad. I'm more interested in why we are drawn to these things than what is produced from their consumption. Because typically the idea is like, we need to expel blank because it's dangerous. And yes, it is, but I think a fundamental question that's unanswered is what makes it powerful in the first place? And you can't have that dialogue of what makes this consumable and what demands attention, or why it demands attention, if you take that tone of this is bad and thus it should be expelled. Yeah, I read a lot of philosophy in grad school, which kind of admittedly played a big part. There was a lot of like Lyotard and Baudrillard and Zizek. I read a tremendous amount because I didn't have any idea what I was doing. But if you read and you kind of consider what you produce will kind of naturally take a form. I don't know if that answered it well.
Oh yeah, no, I think that's it. There's also something I think that's obvious is it is like candy. So it's like, you know, the tone between the two elements, types of elements, though, that it's all visually exciting. It's all fun. I also got a really great question from Caston. Are you ready? Because this is a good one. You might have to think. And has this work made anyone angry? You seem to be interested in how it makes others feel, but she wants to know, how does it make you feel?
I take it like a researcher. In my free time, I read a ton of news. I love the news. I like those kind of moral dilemmas, and considering those moral dilemmas that like the law or politics or philosophy require. You can't, there was this thing about the law that drew me. Was there was an amount of autonomy unique to the individual, a part of the justice system that no one really identifies. That like when you're a cop, you make the decision about whether you apply the law or you give that person a kind of accommodation because of their means or their background. There's this idea like if you commit a crime, every single person who's committed of a crime suffers the same sentence. And that's just not so. And that was the part that really interested me. It's functionally the part that interests me about this kind of way is there's something about visual art and things visual, independent of whether they're art, that they communicate on a language independent of words. We can use words to communicate. If you speak English and I speak English, we can have a discussion of ideas in our head, that sort of floaty gray matter. But when you see something, it immediately it appeals to you immediately in a way that words cannot. And they just happen to tend to be about things that are like shiny or explosive or attractive in some way. This is an image of people in that space from the thesis. But yeah, I have had people get a little upset, but no one has been downright yelling at me. The only time anyone has ever yelled at me is when I did the karaoke. And it's because they took offense to me being a kind of, a white person doing this work. And they were very, let's just say they had a couple of drinks and they maybe said some inappropriate things. But no, I mean, I feel about it in that it's a way that I can process my interests. So for me, it's a kind of catharsis and personal research. Why am I interested? Like, I was a kid, I loved pro wrestling. I love explosions and I love fire and I love anime. There's something about them that is the same and I don't know what. And I make this work for me to try and figure out what that is. And for others, hopefully they learn something about how they are connected also. That's sort of the way I think about it.
Right. Are you ready for another great question?
Yes, I am.
This is from Dr. Malone. She says, Houston, my history of photography students recently read part of Susan Sontag's regarding the pain of others. I'm seeing similar issues arise in your work about how we consume other people's trauma. Not a question, but hopefully something our students are connecting here.
Yeah, one of the questions I got in grad school was, Houston, these are images of harm, but they're not real images. How do you reconcile that? Because when I was making this work, I treated it as the real. And part of what I realized in making them as videos is that they are a secondary conclusion of that harm. It could be real harm, or it could be like sort of the theater of harm. When we see a pro wrestler, they're doing something that may be physically painful, but they're not really, there's that idea, it's real, but it's not real. And then that bleeds into images where people's lives actually end. And there's a distance to how media allows us to interact with things. That if we were to see the image of someone dying, it has a power because we understand it's real, but it's not their real death. It's an image of their death. And that is really powerful. And it has us confront that distance between the actual and the sort of recreation or documentation of the actual.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's an important thing to kind of distinguish. Susan Sontag wrote on Plato's Cave, and I use that in my classes, and it's fabulous. In every single class I do, we talk about Plato's Cave, because that's fundamentally, when I say about like my interest in philosophy, these are shadows that are cast by real things. And for us to understand shadows, we have to consider how they are real and how they aren't, if you were to be familiar with that metaphor. And there's no faster way to get people to confront whether they're real or not than to show them the realist things, which are typically very good or very bad. I remember seeing, I did a report for, the person who used to teach contemporary art when I first started in 2012, that art historian, and I feel bad, I don't remember her name, but I had to write a paper on a photograph for History of Photo, and I chose the falling man from 9/11, and I remember seeing that photo for the very first time.
Yeah, that's so traumatic. Yeah.
But it's staggeringly beautiful. It, as a composition of images, you cannot not look at it because it's such a good photo.
Oh, it's hard, yeah.
The falling man is this photo.
It's so hard to see. It's it is a beautiful. That's it.
Yeah, like compositionally, it's got great repetition and great form, and it has this sort of like the figure is immediately upside down in a way that feels very unnatural, like it's a photo of a man jumping turned upside down. I remember seeing this photo and writing a paper on it in like my first year of Henderson, or second year of Henderson. And I didn't know why I found it compelling. And I didn't know what kind of power it had as an image. And I basically spent my life since then trying to figure that out. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you could talk about it compositionally, because did you say staggering? Because I want to repeat that word, because it is gorgeous. Let's see here. Chelsea also has said, and because she was talking about judicial, the background before, but she's also saying, so it does, she sees it playing a background in the work here, you know. Let's see.
There's no interest that you have as a person who makes things that is irrelevant to what you make. It may be more distant or closer, but it's never irrelevant.
Right.
It's one thing I try to really emphasize in my students is we do this giant 2 foot by 4 foot interest map, where we just literally try to plot every single interest we have and explore them from the widest sense to the narrowest sense. Like an example is, you know, I like TV, and I like Star Trek, and I like The Next Generation, and I like Data, the character from The Next Generation, and that's usually where people stop. But we try to explore what about those things we find interesting. I find Data to be so interesting because he is a metaphor for personhood. And if you think of it as a metaphor for personhood, it allows us to link that item, which is data from a pop culture thing, to an idea that we can assume it with or pair it with that is compelling in that way. And it gets us to think about, you know, this traditional media that is consumptive and just built so that you watch it endlessly and you never click away, to examine that critically. My law background is an interest. I like I said, I went through the process of incarceration. That's probably the easiest way I could put it, for a brief period of a couple of months, and overnight it just magically disappeared. I was arrested and intaked, and they argued for mine to never be released during that process. And I went to house arrest, and I was charged with 7 first-degree felonies of criminal mischief. And overnight, I literally woke up on a Monday morning, and I was arrested for something I had nothing to do with, because they literally got me wrong. Yeah. They chose the wrong person out of a lineup. Right. And it got to the judge 2.5 months later, and she went, "There's nothing here. This is dismissed." And it just magically overnight it went away. And it got me to realize that there's a structure to things, which is like, the way I describe it is like space and behavior become one another. You know, when we think of performance art, it's how does behavior affect space and how does space affect behavior? And it was this kind of like window shattering moment of my life where I saw how quickly things could change and what changes. And, you know, how appearing at school with an ankle monitor, immediately everything changed.
Oh my God.
Based on the visual, based on no context other than the visual, it went immediately overnight to a kind of consequence that was actionable. So yeah.
Wow. Let's see if anybody has any other questions. I'd like maybe talk a little bit. This is amazing. I am completely blown away. I cannot tell you how much I love this stuff, and I can see the seeds of that in those paintings at the very end of your time at Henderson. And, you know, this just is so much fun. It makes me happy for you, for sure. But I also, maybe the practical aspects of, when you were talking about that a little bit with the undergraduate, where you know, eventually moved to a dorm room and worked on campus and quit your, you know, didn't make things hard, put your focus on that. But how was it going? And were you able to work at school? Was your tuition paid? That kind of stuff.
Yeah. So I was you mean for graduate school, correct?
Yeah, let's say, because we already kind of know what happened with undergraduate, which is you got assistantships, you paid for it, you probably took out a few loans, and then graduate school, hopefully they paid for it, is what I'm kind of getting to.
So when I applied for schools, I applied to a handful of them. And when I got accepted to UTSA, I immediately just called them. I called, because I was a graduate student, I was like, let me call the graduate school, because I'm a graduate student. Let me see what they have to offer. So I called them and I just went, hey, my name's FRYER. I just got accepted to the grad program. Are there any opportunities for aid that I can apply for? Anything need-based or work-based? I contacted the art department and I talked to what is our lead administrator. And I went, hey, I'm just accepted here. Is there like a work study position I could do or something? And I did the same for COLFA, which is the College of Liberal and Fine Arts that we rest with. And, you know, just picking up the phone and asking, the worst they can say is no. They made me from in-state, or they made me from an out-of-state to in-state, which took my tuition to thirds. They gave me a very nice presidential scholarship, which was more than enough to cover the cost of tuition.
Right.
There were still living expenses, but I was a work study, so that more or less covered it. I worked at the wood shop for my first year.
Ooh, that sounds fun.
Yeah. So I learned practical skills of, like, I worked in a wood shop for a year, and I was the 2D graduate assistant for a year. And then I worked at Terminal, our downtown gallery, for a year. So.
Wow, perfect.
Yeah. And if I hadn't been given enough money, I just wouldn't have gone. I just would have waited. There's no point in dying to get this. Life's real long. You can go when the time's right.
I'm so glad you think so.
Yeah.
It's getting shorter for me. But hey, Caston, and really I think everybody in this whole meeting wants to know, you know, and maybe even just some tips that you use to be a good art major. But she's saying best tips for being a good art major. You know, what are the ones that but if there's some that, like, I have tricky ones, like I lie to myself and say I'm going to just go in there for 15 minutes, those kind of things. So, but you might have glorious
healthy habits to be productive. I always have a notebook with me. This is my work staff teaching notebook, but I also have a sketchbook I go with, and I try to write every single idea down, right? I write every single idea, no matter how dumb or how long or how short. I've literally just written just like, yes, chanted over. That's an idea. Because like you will have these thoughts that are good and these thoughts are not so good, but you won't know their merit immediately. You need to write them down and you need to put it away for a day or two and you need to read it again later. And if it makes sense later, then it's probably a good idea. I read so much in graduate school. I didn't read a book of my own choosing until I was 17. So I wasn't a very good reader, but in graduate school, when I had all this time to kind of do nothing and everything at once, reading allows you to kind of confront a different idea without having to meet that person. It's basically a book of ideas. And a critique is essentially the ideas of others in reaction to your work. So a kind of, especially a nonfiction sort of thing. I don't read a lot of fiction, to be honest. I don't really like it. I find it to be weird, but like read the ideas that other people have shared and you confront them and you sort of navigate them with critical thinking. I read Susan Sontag's On Photography and I found it to be very helpful, but it also only views it from the idea of photography. And then there's a kind of rebuttal, which is like, well, yes, but what does it do outside of photography now that it's not 1972 or whenever she wrote? Because that was a long time ago. I try to constantly find new people when I can. Google's a real powerful thing. Like if we were to try to go to my 100 artist list, it helps me as a person to kind of know what's going on, and it helps my students when I build it. And I just sort of like update this whenever I can. Let me get like 200%. So.
Oh yeah, there we go. Oh yeah.
And I make this available to all of my students. We study all of them. Yeah, the people who are dead are in D's because I don't find them to be contemporary if they're dead. There are a few who are very important.
10 dead, 10.
You have to know Louise
that number's
Nelson.
Going to go up. Wayne Tebow, somebody was telling me, maybe in Kelsey, that for Brad, he's like 100 and still painting.
Yeah, he turned 100 2 days ago.
Yeah, see, that's why I heard that. So.
And it's good practice.
You could put a D in parentheses next to him. Just kidding.
And this helps, when I consider everything research. My work intersects with movies and video games and, whatever, because they're my interests. So when I watch them, I don't just watch them to have a mindless, I may occasionally, but they're always extra pages in a book for reference. That technology that streamers use on Twitch is exactly the technology that I use for this environment. So like even the technology that links all of this work relates to the kind of thematic element. If someone were to ask, well, how did you build the system? I would say it's built with OBS, Open Broadcast System, which is predominantly used by Twitch streamers who want to broadcast every single second of their life, which is very odd. But yeah, so really, I cannot emphasize it enough. Read good things.
Read's fun.
Like I read a lot of Wesley Yang, who's a very fabulous writer who writes for like N+1 magazine or Tablet magazine. They make all that stuff available. I read a lot of oh my God, what's her name? Hito Steyerl, who's a contemporary German artist who's really good at writing, and it's very hard to find people who write well who make art.
And say that name again, Sweet Pea.
It's highlighted. It's Hito Steyerl.
Oh, there it is. Oh, sorry. God, don't make it any easier for me because it's, Okay,
she does fabulous things on video. Like she writes an entire thing on just like cut and copy, like the idea of what a cut does visually. More than just transition from scene 1 to scene 2. What does it do? Marina Abramovich, when she makes her video-based work, the idea of how large is the figure? How long is the shot? How still is the camera? Does it kind of wiggle? Does it do that? But yeah, no. Step 1 is read. Wow. Step 2 is just write all your ideas down. I try not to doodle a whole lot. I know it sounds paradoxical, but I just try to make those doodles full paintings.
Right. Hey, I'm going to start using that. But I have had some, Chawan, I think he's in our meeting. I saw him earlier and his name earlier, but he's really started using the sketchbook this semester. I had to have a fake fit and threw a pen down and broke it because they weren't using the sketchbook. But he's done a great job of starting to really do some interesting stuff with the sketchbook. So yeah, what else? Let's see if anybody else has got some questions.
that's all for the questions so far. Any other words of support for these goofballs?
One thing I can say is, when I was a student at Henderson, I didn't come in as an art student who like took it seriously I wasn't the best painter. Kathy can attest to that.
You got real good though, and I'll tell you, you're definitely one of those students where I would walk in and see. This is, when he's a senior, we know he's leaving, and I mean, I was like, holy crap, it's great when you see students work that it's just like, wow, I hope I can paint like that someday. So, I mean, it's fun. So, yeah.
I didn't start off I was not the smartest person in the room. I wasn't the best at drawing or the best at painting. I found a way to just like figure out what I want and just try to work toward that and trust the long game. I knew it wasn't going to happen quick. I graduated at 25 and I was older than my peers, sometimes by a lot. And I had to find a way to be okay with that. Like the way Kathy's, this is another sort of Kathyism, which I found very important, was you have to give yourself permission to be a beginner or else you won't become better at anything. And I just made it a point to, I would be subtly competitive where I was like, somebody would get an award. Like literally, you may even remember Gabby Ray. They don't
know. I should get Gabby to do a talk too, because that would be great.
But she got an award from the university. And I went, I'm going to win that award. I don't care how long it takes. I'm going to win it.
What did she do? Oh, she made 50 paintings. Oh, I'm doing it. I'm going to make 75.
I try to just build, I had to build a long plan, which was like, in 10 years, I want blank. I don't care what it takes. Well, I do care what it takes. That sounds wrong, but I'm willing to do what it takes. If I didn't know how to do something, I would find someone who did it, and I would look at their CV and I would see, what do they know? What skills do they know? Where do they write if they're a writer? Where do they exhibit if they are getting shows? I would literally just harvest information. I would find, where did Aaron Calvert get a show? I can apply there. Where did, no, you don't have to start off as the greatest candidate. It just, play the long game and kind of trust the system. I describe it as pushing the snowball. My snowball was very small in the beginning, but if you keep pushing, it will get bigger.
Yes, it does. It's true.
Yeah.
It's true. And the other thing that I really figured out later in life is that everything that I've ever done counts, even the crazy stuff. Kayla and I were talking in a class earlier. She works at Pizza Hut. I was like, I worked at Pizza Hut and worked the Pizza Inn, and how all of those experiences, if the only thing that was good for is the fact that Kayla and I could connect, that you're normal, you work at a Pizza Hut, I did too. That, and the other thing that is real similar between Houston and myself is that I was even older than you. I didn't go to grad school till I was 29. And so, but I acted 22, so it didn't matter. Nobody knew it, but all I'm saying is it took us a while to kind of get serious. And when we got serious, it was like, it's knowing how to do it, which is just freaking do it and get it over with. Don't expect to be a genius. Just make some stuff, and it eventually gets really great. Let's see.
I think one thing that helped was the way I kind of describe it is I kind of lack a self-preservation gene. Just a little bit, which was, if I didn't know something, I would ask, and sometimes it gets a little annoying, but when I was getting close to graduating and I was considering grad schools, I literally built a set of 8 questions, and I emailed it to every faculty member, and I asked them, I was like, hey, if you have time, can you answer these questions? It was like, how did you find your graduate school? Why did you go to that program? If you could, would you go to the same place again? And 2 answered. But if I didn't ask, I would get no answers.
I'm shocked.
Well, it was finals time and it was winter and everyone thinks about Thanksgiving and Christmas.
No, I can't believe it. I hope I sent it back to you. Okay, so any more questions, we've gone an hour and 10. I would like you to hang on for just a minute at the end so we can chit chat. But anybody else have, and by the way, Houston's super easy to get a hold of. He's at the University of Texas, San Antonio, Houston FRYER, and he has a website, so you can contact him there too if you have questions or anything. That he's one of you, so you can ask him. So certainly email him if you want to know more about video or anything like that. I'd like Houston to come back and talk to Innovative Media, obviously, and talk to them about what you're doing too, because that's very similar. So I want to thank everybody for showing up. This was quite a little successful gathering. And Houston there has given you his email there in the chat. So, but we'll say goodbye and bye everybody. Thank you so much. Let's see if, yeah, bye. We'll keep singing goodbye. Yeah, it's great. All those folks are so wonderful. Hey, Angela, do you want to ask him anything? I don't know if she may be. She's the dean. There she is.
Oh, hey.
No, I'm just, thank you so much
Angela.
for this. Hey, how are you? I enjoyed it very much. Thank you for doing this. This is wonderful.
Here's what I need to say is, can you believe how smart he is? I'm just like, hell yeah.
He's amazing. But, you know, he was inspired by some of the best. So
absolutely, absolutely.
But Houston, thank you very much for your time. We really appreciate it. And thank you for helping our incredible art students and our art faculty here. So
Yeah.
Well, yeah, no kidding. And wow, that's such a great, wow, we'll have to do this again, because it really, I'm blown away by what you're making.
Thank you.
Seriously, it's really good.
It took a while, but yeah, it's coming together.
I will see you later.
Have a good one. Nice to meet you. Yeah, thankfully.
But anyway, and this is Ann. Ann and I are going to talk about her when you and I get done.
Yeah, I'm lurking
But
around.
I just want to, yeah, wow, Houston. It's
Houston,
so great. Do you get?
I was going to say,
baby?
I'm glad to hear you talking about spectacle and talking about some of those things. It's good for our students to have a preview of some of that. I went back to grad school late, but I had already gotten a master's degree in something else and was familiar with theory and those kinds of things. But I was very surprised at how many of my fellow students who had BFAs were not exposed to any of that before grad school. And so I was glad to hear you kind of throwing in those terms and letting them taste that a little bit.
Yeah, I learned